The story began in the small town of Arborville, California. A high school football game was underway. We met the local cheerleader, Meg Penny, and the football star, Paul Taylor. We also saw the town's bad boy, Brian Flagg. He was on his motorcycle. That night, a meteorite crashed in the woods outside of town. A homeless man happened to see it. Curious, the man found the meteorite's crash site. Inside a crack in the huge rock, there was some steaming goo. The man grabbed a stick. He poked at the goo, but the goo started to move. It was like it was alive. Then the goo latched onto his hand. It was dissolving his skin. The man screamed in agony. Brian, who was fixing his motorcycle nearby, heard him. Brian hesitated. He wondered if he should check it out, but the man stumbled out right in front of him. He frantically raised an axe, not at Brian, but at his own wrist. The blob was terrifying. The man wanted to cut off his own hand to escape it, but it was no use. The monster just covered the wound. He couldn't get it off. Brian watched the whole thing. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man ran desperately toward the road. Brian, worried, followed him. The man stumbled blindly, right into the path of an oncoming car. Paul was driving. He was taking Meg on a date. They saw they hit the man. They pulled him into the car to take him to the hospital. Brian warned them to be careful of the man's hand. That jelly on it looked dangerous. Paul thought Brian had something to do with it, so he made Brian come to the hospital too. After they got, the man admitted. Paul and Meg stayed to fill out paperwork. Brian just took off. Later, Paul walked past the man's room. He noticed something was wrong. He went in to check. What he saw terrified him. He ran to get a doctor. When they returned, they were horrified. The man's lower half was completely dissolved. It was a gruesome death. Paul ran to call the police. He didn't notice the blood-red monster had crawled up the door and onto the ceiling. Not until goo dripped down and melted the desk did he realize the danger. The monster dropped and lunged at Paul. Meg heard the noise and ran in. She saw a horrific sight. Paul was being pulled into the monster, his face melting. She grabbed his arm to pull him free. The monster was too strong, pulled Paul violently into itself. Paul died a horrible death. Meg was so scared she passed out. When the police arrived, the monster was gone. Sheriff Geller didn't believe Meg's story. He thought she was just hysterical. When he learned Brian was the first one to find the man, the sheriff suspected he was the killer. Meanwhile, Paul's friend Scott was on a date in the woods. He got out to mix drinks at the trunk. Danger crept up on them. Something in the bushes was moving fast, but Scott and the girl in the car had no idea. When Scott got back in the car, the girl was asleep. Scott slipped his hand under her shirt. Just then, the monster burst out from the girl and attacked Scott. They both became the monster's food. After the monster ate, it got even bigger. Then it moved toward town. Back at the police station, the cops got nothing from Brian. With no real evidence, the sheriff had to let him go. Soon, they got another call. They went to the woods where Scott was, but they searched the whole hill and found nothing. Brian left the station. He went to his usual diner. Meg found him there. She told Brian exactly what happened to Paul. Brian was shocked. That jelly thing didn't just move, it ate people. While they were figuring out what to do, the monster had reached the diner's kitchen. It clogged the drain. A plunger didn't work. The diner's handyman, George, decided to use his hand. He pulled out a sticky mess. Then it happened. The monster burst out of the sink drain. It grabbed George. Slowly and horribly, it pulled him down the drain. Brian and Meg saw the whole thing. The monster turned and attacked them next. At the last second, they dove into the walk-in freezer. They thought they were dead, but the monster touched the ice and pulled back. It seemed absolutely terrified of the cold. Meanwhile, the waitress, Fran, escaped out the window. She ran to a nearby phone booth. Fran called the police. As she talked, the monster covered the phone booth. The call connected. The operator told Fran, "Sheriff Geller just left for your diner." Just then, Fran saw something awful. The monster had already eaten Sheriff Geller. The monster crushed the phone booth, and it swallowed Fran too. Terrified, Brian and Meg returned to the police station once more. This time, they learned that Deputy Briggs was sent to the meteor crash site, back near the diner. Father Meeker saw the monster flash by. He wasn't scared. He went into the diner alone to look around. The leftover goo on the floor had crystallized. Father Meeker picked up a few pieces. He put them in a jar and took them home. Meg and Brian went to the meteor crash site. They found Deputy Briggs's car. He was gone, but the headlights were still on. They ran into the woods. Soon, they heard a loud noise overhead. It was a military helicopter. Then, a group of people in hazmat suits appeared. Their leader was Dr. Meadows. Deputy Briggs was with them. Meadows told Meg and Brian they were a government biocontainment team. They were investigating the meteor. He said the meteor had dangerous bacteria. If they didn't lock down the area, it could cause a plague. Brian told Meadows the meteor was dangerous, but it was way worse than bacteria. When Meadows heard the monster was killing people, He told them the town was now under quarantine until they caught the monster and tested everyone. He said they had close contact with the monster. For safety, they couldn't go back to town. He forced them to go to town hall for isolation. Brian didn't trust these guys. He picked the lock and jumped from the truck. Meg was worried about her family, so she stayed. Meanwhile, there was another attack in town, this time at the movie theater. The projectionist felt the room was stuffy. He went to check the vent. The monster was hiding inside and grabbed him. A little later, the theater owner looked for the projectionist. He couldn't find him. He looked up and saw a horrible sight. When Meg got back to town, Dr. Meadows' people were gathering all the residents she found her parents. But her little brother, Kevin, wasn't there. It turned out he and his friend Eddie went to the movies. Meg asked the soldiers for help, but they told her to wait. Worried about Kevin, Meg couldn't wait. She ran to the theater by herself. A horror movie was playing in the theater. The movie was so loud that when the projectionist and owner died, nobody heard a thing. The audience had no idea what was coming. When they saw the giant monster, the crowd panicked. People were screaming and running away, but Meg ran toward the danger. In the lobby, people who didn't get out were being eaten by the blob. Meg tried to help a woman on the floor, but when Meg saw her face, she was already melted. Luckily, Kevin and Eddie were okay. The three of them ran for the back exit. But as the door shut, it snagged Kevin's jacket. He tried to take it off, but the zipper was stuck. The monster started smashing the door. The bolts were popping out. They were running out of time. Meg gave one last pull. It worked. They ran, and the monster burst right through the door. They weren't safe yet. They ran right into a dead-end alley. They had no choice. They pulled open a manhole cover and jumped into the sewer. The monster grabbed Meg's hair. It started to burn. Then she fell into the sewer. Brian went back for his motorcycle. He passed the crash site. He saw Meadows digging up the meteorite, but under the rock, it was a satellite Brian hid in the bushes. He overheard them talking. It wasn't a meteor at all. It was a satellite. It fell from orbit, and it brought that creature with it. Even worse, the satellite also carried an experimental military virus. The virus turned this creature into a super predator. Dr. Meadows and his team were excited, but a scientist named Jennings was worried. He said the creature was growing too fast. Since it landed, it grew 1,000 times bigger. If it kept growing, they wouldn't be able to stop it. But the others didn't care. Jennings didn't want innocent people to die for a bioweapon. But Meadows wouldn't listen. He said making this weapon was for the good of the country. The people who died were just necessary losses. Jennings hated it, but he had to follow orders. Meadows learned the monster was in the sewer. He ordered his men to capture it alive. As for Meg, Kevin, and Eddie, they were expendable. Just then, Brian made a noise. They spotted him. He knocked out a soldier. He jumped on his motorcycle and sped off. Meadows sent soldiers and a helicopter after him. But Brian was a great rider. He dodged the bullets. He lost the soldiers. He hid by a sewer opening. The helicopter couldn't see him. Meadows got a map of the sewer system. The pipes were a confusing mess, but he just needed to close 3 gates. That would trap the monster down below. Meg, Kevin, and Eddie were carefully looking for a way out. Soon, the water started to bubble. Meg helped Kevin climb onto a pipe, but when it was Eddie's turn, a tentacle grabbed him and pulled him under. Meg dove in after him, but she found nothing. Then she saw the monster, finishing off Eddie. Meg and Kevin tried to escape through a grate, but Meg got stuck. She was about to fall. Just then, Jennings arrived with his men. The monster was distracted. Meg told Kevin to run to town hall. Then she let go and dropped back into the water. She found a slippery slope and started to climb. It was very hard. The monster spotted her again. At the last second, Brian appeared. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up. They rode the motorcycle through the pipes, but soon, the tunnel ended. They looked for another way and ran right into the monster again. There was no time to think. Brian gunned the engine. He jumped the bike right over the blob. They escaped the monster for now. But Brian's bike broke down. They had no choice. They had to ditch the bike and run. A few steps later, they ran right into Jennings. All the soldiers with him were dead. He said they had to get to the surface, fast. Jennings led the way. They found an exit. They were almost out. But Meadows wanted to trap the monster. He didn't care about Jennings. He sealed the manhole shut. Just then, Jennings saw the water rising. That meant the monster was close. Brian wasn't going to wait to die. He grabbed Jennings' rocket launcher. He blew the manhole cover wide open. They climbed out. Brian aimed his gun at the soldiers. He told the townspeople that Meadows was lying. Deputy Briggs was worried. He told everyone to calm down. Meadows was furious. He lied and said Brian was infected. He said Brian wanted to spread a plague, to get revenge on everyone. It was a tense standoff. And then, it happened again. The monster burst out and attacked Meadows. Meadows' death showed everyone how real the danger was. The rest of the soldiers forgot about capturing it. They fired everything they had into the sewer. They ran out of bullets, so they threw explosives down the hole. There was a massive explosion. Everyone thought the monster was blown to bits, but a few seconds later, the ground started to shake. Something was about to come up. The monster then burst out of the sewers, kind of into the heart of town. It was pure chaos and panic. Just then, Father Meeker appeared. He was yelling, "This has all been prophesied." The monster was much tougher than they thought. It wasn't scared of bullets. It wasn't even hurt by fire. Father Meeker accidentally caught on fire. Meg grabbed a CO2 fire extinguisher. She ran over to him. Right after she saved Meeker, the monster noticed Meg. Surprisingly, the monster was afraid of the cold from the extinguisher Meg covered them. The survivors ran into town hall, but as they blocked the door, the monster's tentacles shot through the cracks. Deputy Briggs died heroically. Brian showed up in a fire truck to help. By now, the monster covered almost half of town hall. If it found a weak spot, it would get in. There was no time to waste. Brian sprayed the monster with the truck's cold spray. In an instant, the monster's skin peeled off, but it wasn't enough. It didn't kill the monster. Brian tried to run it over, but the monster was too strong. It easily knocked the truck and flipped it upside down. Meg heard the crash. She ran over to find him. She found explosives and a gun on one of the soldiers. The bullets wouldn't kill it, but they could distract it. Brian used the chance to crawl out of the truck. She kept her cool and suddenly lured it toward the pre-positioned nitrogen tanks. Just as the creature was about to devour them, the charges detonated. This doused the monster in vast amounts of liquid nitrogen. In an instant, it was frozen into countless fragile shards of ice. The crisis was finally over, or so it seemed. But Father Meeker's appearance showed it wasn't really the end. He was preaching an apocalyptic sermon to a small, disturbed congregation. He held up a glass jar. Inside, a small swirling piece of the monster was still alive, preserved. He smiled and said, "The Lord will give me a sign."